Tonight on Stuff We Say, Mick Waites, Miles and Kilo, indie games, and how they are made. Welcome everyone back to the Stuff We Say podcast. Joining me today is Mick Waites.
Hi there.
From Four Horses, talking about indie games, indie game development, and honestly, one of my new favorite Switch indie titles. So, I guess just to start off, why don't you tell everyone about yourself a little bit, Mick?
Okay. Right. So I'm Mick Waites. Obviously, I'm based in the UK. I was born back in the early 70s, so I've grown up with video games as they've gone through pretty much every generation. And I've always been a fan of playing them, and decided to start trying to make them really when I was about 11 years old. We had a computer back in those days. Your home computers had built-in programming languages, and I just used to type in other people's programs and then sort of try and work out how they worked. I don't think I ever really thought I'd get a job making actual games that other people would play. But I guess that's where I am now. It's great being able to get games out on consoles and get them on sale worldwide and get feedback from people who are playing them and loving them.
Awesome. And out of curiosity, and this is slightly off topic already, but you said computer, like, are we talking like a C64 or a Spectrum, or out of curiosity?
Yeah, for me it was the Acorn Electron, which I don't think is particularly widely known outside the UK.
That was based off the BBC machines, yeah?
Yeah, the BBC Micro. There's a brilliant documentary called Micromen that's well worth watching about the fight between Acorn and Sinclair for who got the rights to make a machine with the BBC branding on it. Acorn won, and the world wants to be grateful that they did, because they basically designed the ARM chip, which is in just about every single device you probably own in your house, probably even in the door handles. They're that prolific. They're absolutely everywhere. But yeah, the Acorn Electron, it was like, let's get a BBC Micro that's already probably the least powerful of the machines out at the time and take everything out of it that's good and sell it cheaper. And that's what I had, the Acorn Electron. It's not a very good machine, but
it was a start.
Indeed, it was. It was. Some good games came from there. Some that certainly inspired me. One of my favourite games from the Acorn Electron days was called Repton, which was very similar to Boulder Dash, and that inspired my first game that I got published, that I developed entirely myself, which was Digger Dan. In fact, Digger Dan actually started out life as a remake of Repton, but obviously I couldn't publish it because I didn't have the rights to that. So I did some different mechanics, changed the levels, changed the graphics, and Digger Dan was born.
So out of curiosity, when did you personally decide to take the plunge into game development yourself? Decide that this is something not only that I enjoy, but something that I think I could do and actually, sell, my creations on various consoles.
That final sort of decision, certainly to self-publish, was just about 3 years ago now. But prior to that, it was just around the turn of the millennium that I actually got my first job in video game development. But it was actually as a tester, and I'd sort of applied for the job not thinking I was going to get it. I don't know why. I still, to me, the idea of working actually making video games was just a fantasy. It was never really going to happen. So yeah, I'd applied for a job as a tester just to prove one of my friends wrong, who said you could get a job in the industry. So whilst I was working at that company, I sort of tried to take on board what people were doing programming wise, and be inspired by that and driven to do the same thing. But I actually ended up going into project management from testing for a while, and that was just an awful job. Never again do I want to do. Really?
If it's okay to ask, which company?
They're now long dead, so it's fine to say. You probably never heard of them. They were called Runecraft.
I've heard of them.
They were based in the right in the heart of England, and they didn't particularly have any big titles. They worked on a Spec Ops game back on the PlayStation, which I'm not sure if that's the same franchise essentially as the Spec Ops games that are around now. It may have grown into that, but certainly not developed by Runecraft or anyone who was involved in that. The other biggest title was Matt Hoffman's Pro BMX on PlayStation, which obviously was taking the existing work from Tony Hawk's and well, just swapping out the skateboard for a bike because it's that easy. But other than that, we worked on quite a lot of. I mean, it was all work for hire for publishers back in those days, and that's what made the project management so awful, because the people at the top would sign any contract they could get their mitts on, promising absolutely anything regardless of how possible it was, and then the project managers were left basically answering the phone and apologizing to the publisher on a daily basis for why we were late. But yeah, that never again.
So I guess, how much of a gap was there between there and then either getting back into another part of the industry or even indie developing?
Well, like I said, that I started that around the year 2000. I was made redundant from that job due to the company shutting down, and then after a brief time working in a warehouse just to bring the money in, I then got a job back in a company that sort of formed from the ashes of Runecraft, and I could see that was going to be short-lived as well. So I jumped ship before that company was closed down and decided that the games industry wasn't for me. It was just too brutal. We were hit hard, quite hard financially when those companies shut. So I ended up taking a temporary job that lasted 3 years, just simply driving other people's cars around the country, which was quite a nice job and quite well paid given how easy and stress-free it was. And I spent half my time being driven to where I needed to be. So the four of us in the back of the car would all be playing Mario Kart on the DS multiplayer. I'd be winning, of course. And
Same.
Now, I looked at the stats at one point. We'd had 10,000 races and won 9,000 of them. So, yeah, I was definitely better than my colleagues at that one. So yeah, I was out of the industry for a while. And then I had a bit of a near miss on the roads with a large wagon and realised that it possibly wasn't the safest job to be doing. And at that time, my son was born. So the thought of being around for him sort of appealed, so I looked to get back into video game development. Again, I worked with a company that then shut down after 3 years, moved around a little bit until we moved back up to the northeast, which is where my wife's family's from. And at that time, I'd developed Digger Dan for DS, and DSiWare was just about to come into the scene. So I was looking for a publisher to get that published on my behalf. I managed to find one. They published it. Everything was great. And then they essentially offered me a job. And as we were looking to move up here, that was absolutely perfect. So I went and worked for them for a little while. Whilst I was there, got access to 3DS gear, which is sat right in front of me, and made a 3DS version because as nice as the DSiWare was, I felt that the market was somewhat limited to people who'd actually got the correct hardware, because obviously it didn't work on a normal DS. And then of those who'd gone bothered to fight with the eShop to actually try and find games and buy them, because Nintendo didn't make it easy to buy downloadable games in that generation. So I thought the 3DS was going to be a much better fit. Plus I wanted to have a little play with the stereoscopic 3D effect. So I made the 3DS version, but the company I was working for weren't that interested in publishing it. I'm not fully sure why, but to be honest, I'm glad they didn't now, because as a result, I set up Four Horses just to publish it.
And now, out of curiosity, why the name Four Horses?
It's from a only mildly inappropriate story my grandfather used to say. It's someone had mentioned something about four horses, and the person who heard it had misheard what they'd said, and it used to make my granddad chuckle. So I thought it'd just be a nice tribute to him. It was going to be that or the phrase "no more magic," which I quite liked as well. But I can imagine what the logo would have been for that. But yeah, we went with 4 horses. There's no connection to any apocalypse or anything. In fact, it wasn't until quite some time after the company was set up, and I was just googling things just to find reviews of Kid Trip and the like. And there's all these 4 horses of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse keep coming up, and I'm like, I never thought that.
Oh, I mean, now you can make a game based off the apocalypse now, you know?
Well, potentially, yeah. Yeah, but it's got to be in a retro style.
So, I guess first one was Digger Dan. You said, very much kind of a Boulder Dash-esque inspiration.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. It's still available on the DSi. Where I think I didn't update the DSi version at all. Yeah, because I wasn't published. That's right. But I did add an extra 25 levels to the 3DS one, which was quite good. Particularly because I designed those myself. The original levels were outsourced to a designer because I didn't particularly class myself as a designer at that stage. But as I'm doing it more and more, I think I'm getting better at it. Although I still, when it comes to level design, I still tend to do what a lot of newbies do, which is design everything absolutely as difficult as anything, because by then you understand the game mechanics so well, so it's really easy to design difficult levels because they're not difficult to you. But what's really hard to do is design the easier ones. But yeah. So yeah, Digger Dan was the first game.
And then after that, there was another between that and Kid Trip, right?
No. Yes, there was technically. Star Ghost might be the one you're thinking of.
Mm-hmm. I think that's it.
Yeah, we got Kid Trip published in Japan by Rainy Frog, and they asked me if I'd do them a favour and do them a quick port of a Unity game, which sort of stupidly I said yes to because I'd never touched Unity before in my life. But I thought, well, how hard can it be? And I don't regret doing it, and I sort of do regret doing it because it sort of added a couple of months onto Kid Trip getting released on the Switch, and I think the eShop just got that little bit too saturated by the time Kid Trip came out in November. If I could have had it out in sort of September, it would have. I think it would have been even better for us. But on the other hand, Star Ghost paid some bills, paid for a holiday, which was nice. So I don't regret it in that sense. But yeah, Kid Trip was already out on 3DS by the time we did Star Ghost.
And so even though, I've played it and I actually, at the making of this podcast, actually did a Miles and Kilo review, which I recorded just the other day. Could you give everyone kind of the gist and, I guess, story behind Kid Trip?
Well, the story is very light. I'm not a huge fan of stories in games. Sometimes I think they can be quite off-putting. But the overview is Miles is flying along in his plane one day, suffers an unfortunate accident when he flies into a giraffe, as happens to most pilots at some point in their lives. Ends up crash landing on the island, and all the wildlife are not too happy at him being there, so they basically chase him. So that's the intro. It's over in a few seconds as the game starts up, and from that point onwards, Miles doesn't stop running pretty much, and you just have to get from the left-hand side of each level to the right-hand side of the level as fast as you can, and try and escape from the wildlife who are chasing you. So many people keep saying it's a endless runner. It's not. It's an auto runner. Obviously, it's level based. There's a fixed number of levels. In addition to running and jumping and bouncing off enemies, you can control your speed, either speeding up or slowing down, depending on what you've got the default movement speed to be. And you can throw an unlimited number of rocks at the wildlife to knock them out of the way. But it's not helpful to just spam the rock button, because some of the enemies you're going to have to be using as platforms at some point. So if you've already thrown a stone at them, you're going to be jumping in the water pretty soon. But that's Kid Trip. It's short and it's sweet. It's highly polished. The original creator, a guy called Mike Burns, who I keep saying this, I should actually ask him, but I'm fairly sure he was still at school when he was originally developing it. It took him about 4 years, and it's a really, really good quality game for a one-man dev team, which is what it is. He outsourced the music. It's got some fantastic chip music from a guy called Chris Kuckler. But other than that, it's entirely his own work, and he's very proud of it, and he's every right to be. It's a really good quality game.
Absolutely. And so, like, do you know what kind of how how long was that in development? Would you say before? Because he developed it in Four Horses published, correct? Or
Yeah, he developed it on iOS. I say it took him about 4 years, I think, from when he first started it to when he actually got the game published. Um, and he self-published that on iOS. I think I just said that. And I mean, that was quite a while ago as well. I think that was back 2013 when he first got it published. But it was actually long before that that I'd talked to him about doing a 3DS port. And at the time, he did have another potential publisher in mind who'd said they were interested in taking it to 3DS because he'd posted a lot of screenshots online and got quite a following, and a lot of people wanted him to get this game finished so he could play it because everyone thought it looked fantastic, which is how I first started speaking to him. And then it was years later. I have a day job, by the way. Four Horses isn't a full-time venture for me. I'm a solo developer. But as yet, I'm not bringing in enough money to do this full time, so I have a day job. And one of my colleagues in my day job just happened to mention Kid Trip, just out of the blue, that he'd played this game and really liked it. And it sort of reminded me of its existence. So I tracked down Mike again and said, look, whatever happened to this 3DS version? Because I've just published a 3DS game and I'm sat with a dev kit and nothing to do with it. And I got the game up and running in about 4 weeks, I think. But it was a case of converting the original code from Apple's favorite Objective-C over to C++ to run on my engine. Got the 3DS version out, and then Nintendo, I think we'd already heard about the Switch had we heard about the Switch? No, it came out just a few months. I can't remember the timing of everything. Yeah, I think we already knew about the Switch by then. So I started talking to Nintendo about a Switch version, not really thinking that they'd go for it, but they did. So that took me a week to make, because it was just a case of converting the code that does the drawing of the sprites and the reading of the controller, and the job was done just about.
so, out of curiosity with that, what exactly is the process you have to go through to say convert an iOS game to a 3DS game, and then from there a 3DS game to a Switch game?
Well, it's all entirely down to the framework that the thing's created with. Now, with the original iOS code for Kid Trip, the language structure of Objective-C is very similar to C++ because they've both got roots in the same base language, C. And Mike had written all his own rendering code, so it wasn't heavily reliant on anyone else's code whatsoever. So in some ways that was quite easy. It was just a case of working out which was the file where essentially the code starts when the game runs, working on that first, changing the code over, getting rid of all the errors, and filling enough sort of empty shells of the objects that it wants to know about, so that it can at least think it's running, and then going and filling in the empty shells with the code for those so that the menus start playing, the intro starts playing, and so on and so forth. So for that one, it wasn't so bad. For Miles and Kilo, the process was even more simple because he's actually written this in a existing engine mono game, which is available on Switch. So it was simply a case of getting the project set up and getting it running, and then just a few little bits to plug in some hardware specific code to deal with controllers all being disconnected, and the HD rumble, the support for vibration in mono games, not really there for HD rumble. It just does vibration rather than anything more fancy. So yeah, it really depends on what's supporting the thing in the first place. So the engine I use myself, that I use for Kid Trip, is just quite a simple, at the minute, sprite rendering engine. You can draw sprites, draw them at different angles, different sizes, different places of the screen. You can play music, you can play sound effects, you can read the controller and do load and save data. But that's all you need, really, to get a game up and running. So When it came to then doing the Switch version, all I had to do was write the equivalent code that plays the music, draws the graphics, reads the controller, and that was it. It was up and running very, very quickly.
And so Miles and Kilo from the get go was built up with the Switch in mind, correct?
Definitely with consoles in mind. I think when he started it, no one knew what the Switch was. I don't think Nintendo had even teased that they got another console on the way then. But yeah, it was definitely built with console in mind. When Mike designed Kid Trip, I don't think he ever dreamed when he started that he'd be seeing the game on a console. So he very much designed it around the platforms that he expected it to be launched on, which would be mobile. So it was designed for two-finger control and an auto running. So again, the level designs and the mechanics aren't really there to let the character stop moving, despite people constantly asking, can we add that? But with Miles and Kilo, he definitely designed it. I mean, he knew at very least he was going to try to release it on Steam, so he was going to have touchscreen controls for the phones with auto running and full control for people with control pads on Steam. And again, consoles were definitely there in his mind in this case for getting the game released. And it plays so well on the Switch. It's so nice.
It really does. And I guess kind of going into that, like how much of a gap was there between Miles and Kilo and Kid Trip?
Again, about 4 years, but I don't think he wasn't working on it constantly. I think he put about 2 years worth of work into Miles and Kilo, but to some degree, he had a lot of the framework there because in some ways, I think Miles and Kilo is the game he would have made out of Kid Trip if he'd have just kept working on Kid Trip forever. But it made sense to get it released, get it out there, and get some return on the amount of work he'd put into it. So Miles and Kilo is very much a refinement of Kid Trip. There is actually code when I was converting Kid Trip. I did notice there's code for things like being able to wall jump that just never made it through into the final version. And obviously then that made it through into Miles and Kilo. But yeah, I think it was about 2 years it took.
So I guess shifting into Miles and Kilo itself, first things first, like how long did that one take to get onto the Switch up and running?
1 day.
1 day, really?
It was really, yeah, and it wasn't even me that did that. That was Mike, because he was already familiar with it, and I was still working on the aftermath of getting Kid Trip released and looking at doing the patch and the demo. We did a patch. I can't remember what the patch was. We did a patch. It was definitely more than an icon. Oh, we added HD Rumble video support, although video support was really easy. But yeah, I was busy straight away after the launch. You just have a period of doing so much that he decided he'd get on and start Miles and Kilo. And like I said, with it running on an existing engine, it can be. I mean, I was the same with Star Ghost. For me, I had the basic game up and running in a day, without even knowing what I was doing with Unity, which it's quite nice when you can do that. So yeah, it was up and running in a day, but there was quite a lot of work he wanted to do with it. He got a lot of feedback from the iOS version and the Steam version, so there are quite a number of differences in the Switch version compared to them. For example, on the original iOS release, in story mode, you couldn't backtrack, you couldn't go and try and improve your score on a level, and he sort of made the time attack mode work that way instead. So time attack, you just one attempt at each level to play through, unless you die, in which case obviously you restart the level. Just to give the players freedom to go back and try and S-rank all the levels. We added some achievements that weren't in the other versions, and one of my contributions was to rewrite the text rendering code just to make it look a little bit nicer. But yeah, getting it over was a really, really quick process. What I would like to do, because we're going to look at moving it to other consoles as well. I'm looking at them right now. And when that's done, if we get Kid Trip done, I will have a version of my engine that runs on pretty much every current gen platform that people play games on, except mobile. and it'd be really nice to develop a game from scratch for it, because it will simply be a case of right off the bat, it just works on everything without any additional work whatsoever. It'll just be there, and I'm looking forward to giving that a try. But I think we're a little way off that just yet.
What consoles do you have in mind? Like all of the big three?
Yeah, all the big three, Vita and Windows Store as well, because Microsoft are basically requiring that. They're a bit funny with the concept approval. If your game's not going to feature any exclusive content and not going to release first on their platform, then they want something from you in return. So we're getting a Windows version as well, but as far as I can tell, it's just a case of pushing a button, and that it's basically going to be the same build that goes on the Xbox. So it's no skin off my nose for that.
So I guess going into Miles and Kilo, I guess it's a sequel to Kid Trip, and it
is.
Yes, and from my notes, definitely, it's almost like an 8-bit to 16-bit jump in the graphical style, which I thought, is just kind of a nice touch there. I guess or at the very least going from like kind of a Commodore 64 8-bit to like a Master System.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. I'm not sure if that was Mike's thoughts when he created the graphics. That in some ways I find the smaller, lower res graphics cuter, but the more I'm playing Miles and Kilo, particularly we've got quite a big screen downstairs, so I think Miles and Kilo looks better on a big screen. I think Kid Trip looks better on a small screen. I think that's fair to say. Although Miles and Kilo looks great in handheld mode as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So yeah, I think that's a fair assertion. Definitely. It's it is like going from one generation to the next. But yeah, as you say, it is a sequel to Kid Trip. But we've been for part of the promotion stuff we're going to be doing, we're going to be releasing some character lore at some point, sort of some background info on the different characters in the game. And we discussed this previously, that because if you've played Kid Trip to the end, there's sort of a bit of a cliffhanger ending, sort of, and there's no explanation at the start of Miles and Kilo as to what's happened in between. So we would quite like to make a game somewhere in the middle, but in a different style. Definitely not a fast action platform runner, which both Miles and Kilo and Kid Trip are. So more exploration, more problem solving.
For sure. Though Miles and Kilo in its own right is a bit of a different game, and one thing I noticed, I point this out right where I start off into the review, is because you've gone from that endless runner to more of that kind of traditional platforming. The way it's done, it really reminded me a lot of the Adventure Island games, and particularly the first Wonder Boy game. Were those big inspirations? Because I right off the bat say that it's, to me I was like, this game does kind of for that style of game what Bloodstained did for Castlevania.
Absolutely, yeah. It's. I mean, that was Mike's always said that's been his inspiration as the Adventure Island games. Donkey Kong Country as well. Particularly see that in the silhouette level, but yeah, 100% Adventure Island, which is why the surfboard's in there. You ride the surfboard the same way as in Wonder Boy you ride the skateboard. But yeah, that they were definitely his inspiration. I should actually dig out Adventure Island because it's not one I've played here. We got Wonder Boy over here. I was very familiar with that. I really like that game, but I never got into Adventure Island myself, so I should really dig it out.
Adventure Island's interesting. I forget what the long story of that, but essentially, if you've played the first Wonder Boy, it's exactly the same as Adventure Island 1.
Yeah, that was the impression I got from what I've read or spoken to people about. Yeah.
Yeah, some sort of weird licensing thing. The 80s were quite a weird time.
Yeah, very true. I mean, yeah, where Star Fox as well. That had a different name over in Europe for a while. Never understood why.
And then there was other weird things too, like I know y'all's Contra became Probotector and whatnot. Yeah,
it did. I wonder. I think that might have been the Germany thing. That Germany were very sensitive about games with people shooting people. So you got a lot of people shooting zombies, people shooting dinosaurs, people shooting robots. just to sort of get around their sensitivities. So yeah, I wonder if that was down to that. Nintendo Europe's based in Germany as well, so they're very much in the heart of that sensitive region. Although I think they're less sensitive now.
For sure. And I guess going back into Miles and Kilo, it's really interesting though seeing something actually doing that Adventure Island style, because there's so many retro throwback indie games like that, but it it's refreshing to see something that's not being a Mario-esque game or a Zelda-esque or a Sonic-esque. It's nice to see something that's a bit more original. Which I really appreciated that.
Good, good. It's hard. I mean, one of the things I said when I set up Four Horses was that I wanted to make games very much in a retro style, but without the restrictions that were imposed on the hardware back in those days. And I keep looking around at other games now back from that I used to love for inspiration, and it's really hard to get something that doesn't seem to have already been done. But yeah, Miles and Kilo, it is very much a game of the 80s and 90s. It's just pure fun. There's no other way really to describe it. It's fun to play. It's what a game should be. You lose a life, you're straight back in. Well, there aren't lives anyway, but you kill a character, you're straight back into the game. There's no waiting, there's no loading screens. It's just all instant.
And out of curiosity, I thought I really liked that life concept. I've been noticing some games where it's like the idea of death just being kind of a slap on the wrist. Where you die, but the stage is short and you just go back to the beginning. What was that kind of the idea y'all were going into the game with, where it's like if you die, don't make it like this horrible punishing thing?
Yeah, the life system was in Kid Trip just as a way to stop you accumulating so many coins, really, because your coins were going to be some form of score at the end of the game, just for sort of ranking. And it was decided that we should, well, Mike decided, because obviously he designed it, that he should use lives as a way to sort of essentially losing the coins as a way of punishing you for losing lives. But I think he regretted that decision. So when it came to make Kid Trip, he got rid of the lives altogether. Still kept the coins as a way of score though, and instead it just when you do lose a life, it resets you back to. It's like there's a checkpoint at the start of the level essentially. So when you lose a life, you go back to however long it's taken you to get that far into the game, and resets your coin count to what you had at the start of that level, and your score as well, because there was an actual score in this one as well, which there wasn't in Kid Trip. So yeah, it was a very conscious decision to not have lives and not punish you. It's just keep trying the level till you succeed and don't worry about it.
Nice. And now I guess going from that, what would you say really separates Miles and Kilo from other indies? Like what would you say is your favorite part about it?
That's an interesting one. There's some really, really good indie games about. My favourite aspect of the game that's not so much about the game is that it's a one-man creation. I think it really shines. The level of quality really shines for a one-man game. And I think people would be surprised if they didn't know that, having played it, if they then were told that this was actually created by a single person. But my favourite aspect of it is what I said before, is that it is just pure fun. There's none of the things that I'm starting to really hate about modern games, which is DLC and crowdfunding. I'm getting very tired of crowdfunded games. There's no always online requirement. It's just you load the game up, it loads very quickly. It's fast, it's smooth, and your gameplay sessions are the same. They're fast and smooth. You're not stuck waiting for the next level to load. It's just constant. It's in your face. I'd say that's my favorite aspect because it does take me back to how games were when they were on cartridge back in the day when it was your Game Boy, your Master System. The way those cartridges work are totally different to modern cartridges. Modern cartridges are just like file systems, and you've got loading time same as everything else. But in those days, when the cartridge was in, there was no loading. It was a different setup, and that's what I like the most about it. It's fast.
And out of curiosity, though, and I guess this is kind of the other end of it, I've heard people saying there's issues with the Nintendo Switch eShop becoming oversaturated, and a lot of Nintendo recently said that they want to get 20 to 30 new games out on the eShop every week. Do you see kind of a Steam-esque problem arising there? And do you think a lot of that is on... And do you think that comes down to Nintendo lacking a quality control, Nintendo lacking ability to promote games, or even just the eShop having kind of an archaic design?
I think there's a lot of problems with it. One problem we suffered is because of this 20 to 30, even before Nintendo said that, there was a week where I counted up, there were 30 releases on the eShop in America. Some of those were full price games as well, but that's just a stupid figure. That is quite simply too high. Now, I can't say I want curation on there. I want Nintendo to put fewer games on there because being one of the tiniest developers, I think we'd be one of the first to disappear. So, I definitely don't want that. But to stand out, we decided to do a promotion where anyone who bought Miles and Kilo who didn't already have Kid Trip would get Kid Trip free of charge. And anyone who had already got Kid Trip could essentially get the price of Kid Trip off the price of Miles and Kilo. So they worked out the same either way, because I don't like the idea of people who've already supported us then missing out on benefits. And looking at the numbers after the promotion of all the people who bought Miles and Kilo at full price and could have downloaded Kid Trip free, only 2/5 did, 40%, and that's simply because they didn't know that they were entitled to it. And they didn't know that because the eShop's not set up to tell them. Unless they've already got one game and happen to go and look at the other, they then see a badge saying there's a discount. You'd think there'd be some way to notify them to say there's this owner discount set up, you own one game, hey, look, you can get this. So that promotion in our eyes was a bit of a flop. But discoverability generally on the eShop is really, really hard. Realistically, from my point of view, even though Kid Trip sold really well on Switch, we were happy with the sales. It hasn't really sold enough to pay what we should have been paid for its development. If we were doing this as a full-time job, we'd quite simply be out of business. And Miles and Kilos, so far has been less successful than Kid Trip. So, if we weren't doing this as a hobby, we would be out of business. And it's a shame because I'd like to say that I don't think Four Horses is like some of the developers out there. We're not just shoveling out lower quality games as fast as we can to make a quick buck. We're putting our hearts and souls into these, and we're making the best games we can. And I think the end results are very worthwhile. And the feedback we're getting from the reviewers and from the public who have played the game, they agree. They really love them. They think they're great games. But how do we get that message out there? Now, I'd love to say that I think Nintendo America should be like boosting us and tweeting and letting the world know and putting us at the front of the eShop and helping push my business along. But I've no right to expect that, really, because everyone who publishes the game on the platform should then essentially get those rights as well. It's just a little difficult though when you see them promoting a game that's already had its funding paid for entirely through a Kickstarter campaign, and then it's sold successfully on another platform, and then Nintendo hold it up as a shining beacon and say, look, come buy a Switch because they've got this game on there, and the game that you're struggling to get seen just gets no visibility at all. But I guess that's it is down to us, and in an ideal world, I'd have a pot of money aside for doing promotion. But it's not an ideal world. I've got a family and I've got a mortgage, and I haven't got a lot of money to invest in the business. I don't particularly want to get into debt with the business, so I don't want to risk taking out a loan that I then can't pay off if my attempts to promote the game are unsuccessful. So it's hard. And if Nintendo do attempt to get 30 releases a week, indie releases a week, they're gonna find that they get releases from 25 out of 30 of those developers are going to be out of business within a year, because realistically their games aren't going to sell enough to keep them afloat, because there's just too many.
Well, and it's funny as well, because just looking on it, with my own stuff, I know I've even though I cover mostly retro stuff, I try to cover indie stuff a lot as well, because I mean the channel's just what do I enjoy, right?
Yeah.
But I notice, like, a lot of times when I'm on the eShop, I find stuff like there's this one game called Drone Fight, which is pretty much a terrible Mario Kart clone but with drones. There's this one that a buddy of mine, Beat 'em Ups, actually found, which is called it's like Electric Telephone Love, which is like a dating sim, except it was only released in Japanese but on the US eShop.
Yeah, that's just come out this week, hasn't it? Isn't that there's 3 of them or something? It's a bit weird, that one.
And it's like, do you think Nintendo's just lacking quality control in that point, in addition to being able to promote games that are getting high critical acclaim?
It's a difficult one, because should they let developers be in a situation where they've put their hearts and souls into a game and then they take them to them, and then Nintendo then go, well, we don't want this actually after all, because arbitrarily someone somewhere has decided it's not good enough. I mean, Miles and Kilo, we've had a review where someone scored it 9.75 out of 10, which absolutely blew me away. And we've had a review where someone's given it 0. There's, of all our reviews, there's one reviewer who absolutely hated it. What if I'd sent it off to Nintendo for their curation process, and the person who tested it said 0? If we got the 0 person, the game would never be out. I mean, they need to do something. I don't know what that something is. I'm glad I'm not in their shoes. I'm not a huge fan of curation when I think about it, but on the other hand, I do also see that it's necessary.
Right.
And there's a part of me who would love to see it more visible, but then who am I to judge?
Right, but
I try to play devil's advocate all the time.
No, for sure. And well, I feel like, just looking at the eShop right now, though, I feel like, I don't know, I remember back when they'd put like a seal of quality in each game, or even if it was a bad game, at the very least you can guarantee that A, it will start up properly, and B, that it's going to be completely in English.
Yeah, that you you would think that'd be a basic, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
And I was just discussing with a colleague at work today. Was talking about Captain Toad, and clearly their standards have slipped in their own games if they can do a port of the Wii U game and not even notice that the animation for when you're scanning amiibos broken, and it sort of does an effect from the wrong side of the system, because it's based on where the NFC reader is on the Wii U gamepad.
Oh, no.
But yeah, it's a tough one. It really is. I mean, with the Xbox, you have to go through concept approval to get onto the store, and it felt like a bit of a grind from my point of view. I mean, I'm not a marketing person, so the sort of nonsense I had to write to try and big up the game, it's not in my nature to do it. So I don't know. I don't think I'd like it if it was there, because I'd always be worried that as much as I love the games I'm creating, that I'd be wasting my time. And yeah, it's a tough one. I mean, Nintendo do have a curation process anyway. They haven't accepted every developer to Switch. I'm aware of a couple of developers out there who published on Wii U and who Nintendo haven't given them access to Switch yet, and possibly never will. So they are at least trying to curate it to some degree. But it is a tough one. I want them to do something. What I'd quite like to see is 2 eShops on the Switch. I'd like to see the get your card-based games in download form from this eShop, and get your download-only games from this other eShop. Maybe, although again, maybe that'll hurt because maybe people will only go to the big game shop, never look at the little games. But I don't know. I really don't know. We'll just have to see how it goes. One thing we've not done yet is we've not had any of the games on sale. So other than the original launch offers, and I know a lot of developers basically have their games on sale practically from day one because that's when people buy. Sales of download games are not something I particularly approve of in principle. Just again, I'm old-fashioned. I don't see why people who go out of the way to buy my games at launch and pay full price should then get slapped in the face 3 months later when I put it on sale just to try and claw in a few more sales. But unfortunately, it's become such a common practice that I think there's a large number of players out there who simply will never buy anything at launch because they'll know they'll get it cheaper, which, to be fair, is the smart thing to do. Why pay twice as much or however much for a game when you know you'll definitely be able to get it at some point in the future cheaper? Just hold off.
Actually, it's funny you bring that up because you mentioned Captain Toad earlier, and they just released that full price release on the Switch. So I come down to the States, right, and I finally actually picked it up on Wii U because it's $15 down here used compared to $65 used back in Canada for the Switch.
Wow.
Yeah, which I mean
that's a huge difference.
I mean, I know there's conversion rate, so it'd probably be more like 45 American, but still, you know.
Yeah.
So what would you say is the biggest problem facing indie devs today on the Switch? Is it purely the absolute clout of games that you have to sort through on the eShop?
Yeah, it's simply visibility and discoverability. Maybe some way other than the chart system for these are the most popular games. Maybe a user rating system, and for people to find the most popular game. They don't do that, do they? Because they did that on the 3DS for a while. Users could rate the games, and then I think Digger Dan managed to appear in the top 10 for a brief while, just because I think 3 people had rated it and they all given it 5. So, but yeah, it was. I think maybe something like that, so that at least feedback. Something else we're probably going to try with Miles and Kilo is get a demo out there, because so many of the reviewers had sort of said, yeah, this sort of looked quite cool, but then I played it, oh my god, I absolutely love it, it's just perfect. So hopefully maybe the players will do that as well. If we get a demo out there, that might translate to more success for us.
Nice. And I guess from there, then, you know, it's definitely a grind and whatnot, but what advice, I guess, before we end off, what advice would you give to anyone who wants to get into creating their own games, especially for platforms such as Switch?
Oh, for a platform such as Switch. Really, I mean, for me, the route to getting access to the platforms and being able to create games to sell directly for Nintendo was through having worked for other developers, because I built a relationship up with Nintendo. I'd dealt with all the submissions with the company I was in, and they then essentially recognized me as someone who'd been trusted with their secrets, essentially, and that they could trust. So the easiest way, if it's the best way to describe it, I would say, is through working for someone else. And to be honest, you will learn so much working for someone else anyway. I mean, I'm self-taught as a programmer. I say that, but in reality, in more recent years, because I've worked for other companies and working alongside people, particularly the company I'm at now. We do a system of pair programming where two people work around the same monitor on the same problem, one talking and one typing. You pick up new things so quickly, yeah, new ideas, new ways of working, better techniques. So if you're looking, I would say the best way to, if you want to end up as an indie, is to try create things on your own in your spare time where you can, and use those for practice, but also to show to potential employers to get you into the industry, to show what you can do. And then when you're in there, build up the relationships, build up the experience, get games under your belt that you can then, because part of the application process, it'll be what have you worked on, what platforms has it been published on. The more things you can list across more platforms, they're going to say, yeah, this guy knows what they're doing. They're not just someone who's wasting our time. I'd say that would be the best route, and believe in yourself. I think what's held me back for so long is that I don't really think I valued myself on my abilities too much, and I just saw a life of making video games as being a fantasy. So yeah, believe in yourself sooner than I did anyway.
Excellent. And so with that, Mick Waites, everyone, where can people find you, and where can people find out more on Miles and Kilo? And I guess actually I do have one last question. What's the future for Four Horses? What projects can we look forward to?
It's very, very, very difficult to say. I have talked with another individual who's in a similar situation to Mike Burns, who's got a couple of absolutely fantastic mobile games, and I've said I would quite like to see those games on console, and if I can help in that in any way, I would love to. But in the immediate future, it's getting Miles and Kilo and Kid Trip onto other platforms, get those out, and see how they go. Beyond that, I mean, the mobile games might not ever happen. I mean, I've not got an agreement in place there for those at all. But it's difficult to say, because it is very, very, very hard putting time into a small business when you've already got a full-time job. So I really don't know. Nothing's certain. I don't like to give. It's not so much to give anything. I don't like to say anything about what I might do if there's any chance of it not coming true. So yeah, I really can't say. It could be we create the prequel to Miles and Kilo, the first sequel to Kid Trip. It could be something entirely new, or it might be nothing at all. There's every possibility of any one of those.
Cool. Then with that, where can people find you? Where can people find Four Horses online? Where can people learn more about Miles and Kilo and potentially get it?
Well, potentially get it. You can buy it on iOS or Steam, or obviously the Nintendo Switch eShop. The easiest way to get hold of me is through Twitter. So it's at Four Horses Games. It's FOUR rather than the number. And we're also on the web at fourhorses.co.uk. I don't do Facebook. So yeah, that's the easiest way, really.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for coming along for this episode.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's good speaking to you.
You too. And with that, thank you all very much for watching or listening, depending on what platform you're on. Of course, subscribe to the Stuff We Say podcast, or if you want to see my own personal videos on Stuff We Play on YouTube. So with that, thank you all very much for watching. Stay classy, and I'll see all of you next time.